question everything and everyone and do your research. Take nothing at face value. Nothing is ever that simple in the cannabis industry.
For Soil to the Oil Media, this is the CannaBS Detector with your host and California cannabis industry expert, Kristen Yoder. Hi everyone, I'm Barry Krauss, producer and more than occasional co-host of Soil to the Oil Media's The CannaBS Detector Podcast, featuring California cannabis industry expert and passionate watchdog, Kristen Yoder. I want to personally thank each and every one of you for listening to our podcast, and in this episode, introduce you to the hosts, myself included, but especially to Kristen, and tell you why we're making this podcast and what's in it for you, our listeners, and what we hope you'll take away from it. I help organizations improve their performance, enabling them to be more competitive and profitable. Helping organizations to learn from their experiences and putting that insight into action is essential to this. And for me, this starts with story-based learning, which I found is one of the best ways to put experiences into action. It's also what drew me to podcasts in the first place. Podcasts are great examples of story-based learning. That and my interest in the emerging cannabis market is what drew me to become Kristen's producer for this podcast. Great digital storytelling lets us join with one another around a virtual campfire to share our tribal knowledge and wisdom. This podcast is all about learning from the experiences of real people in the cannabis industry through their stories, so that hopefully together we can put that learning into action and improve the industry for everyone. When I first met Kristen, it was her unique voice that captured my attention, and I think we can all agree that her voice certainly is unique. In our very first conversation, we discovered our mutual love of podcasts and found we were drawn to the same ones and both had been interested in creating one for some time. Her insight into the downside of legalization of cannabis in California and her passion for informing potential entrepreneurs of the realities of getting into the industry made for an easy topic around which to build a podcast. Working with Kristen has been amazing. I have learned so much from her in just a short time. She has 13 years experience in the Los Angeles market managing successful cannabis businesses in every sector of the industry. And as she likes to say, and rightfully so, from the soil to the oil. She spent 5 years managing the first medical cannabis dispensary in Los Angeles, and as the clientele she served were really in need of the medical cannabis she was helping them choose, this really had a huge influence on her and helped shape her into the advocate she is today. She then spent 2 years apprenticing under a master grower, 3 years in multiple roles for one of the largest edible companies in California, and other stints in a cannabis testing lab and in cannabis consulting. Today, she's an important and sought-after voice in the cannabis media, hosting training events, a radio show, this podcast, and a host of other endeavors that continue to put her in the spotlight. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Kristen Yoder about her motivation for doing this podcast. I hope you enjoy it. Let me ask you this question. What do you love about podcasts?
A story about podcasts to explain why I love podcasts is when I was 21, I started listening to Dogma Free America and The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. And that's when I discovered after my entire life that I am an atheist. Like, I literally don't need to believe in anything. It was such a freeing, awesome experience. And this is probably not good for the podcast because I'm going to turn off all the religious people, but it really impacted my life. The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe actually kind of ruined my life because it destroyed all belief in like anything alternative except for cannabis, because I know that works. But like multivitamins, they destroyed my placebo effect, which kind of sucks because I have no faith in anything anymore. But I mean, podcasts have had like a very deep impact on my life, and I'd rather spend my time listening to somebody talking than listening to music.
Why this podcast? Why CannaBS? Why did you want to do this in the first place?
In the first place, I wanted to be able to point a light on the bullshit part of the cannabis industry, which is basically the capitalist part where people are just getting ripped off and, you know, where money is involved, a lot of bad things can happen. and bad things are happening from greed and political corruption, etc. So all I ever hear are podcasts about successful entrepreneurs or some sort of promotional podcast where someone comes on and talks about their company and their product or something like that. Nobody talks about how hard it is. And it goes against advertising for companies. It might go against their marketing campaign or make the market not look as good for them, which is not good for sales. So you never hear about the corruption. Why would anyone cover that anyways, especially when we don't even know where the money is coming from that is given to politicians to affect on a local level the way they regulate things and who they allow to operate. So I just want to, not only do I want to, it is my pleasure to call this bullshit out. I do it all the time anyways, and everybody loves it. So I thought, why not share it with the world?
Yeah, I love it too. In one of our very first conversations, I think, you said, hey, everybody is throwing a big party and nobody is talking about the hangover. And I want to talk about the hangover. And I thought that I always loved that as a kind of a tagline, or at least as a, here's kind of what the pod's all about.
Yeah, it was actually about a funeral. Like while everyone's celebrating the end of prohibition, I'm throwing a funeral for the end of medical cannabis, the end of compassion in cannabis. Now it's just capitalism. Especially if you go public, it seems, especially in the cannabis industry. When companies go public, all you see are press releases because they're not allowed to advertise cannabis companies like other companies or something like that. I don't know, maybe it's SEC guidelines. But once a company goes public, it is literally about profit. That's it. So we see a lot of pump and dump schemes in the cannabis industry, publicly traded companies where there's definitely the compassion. There's no compassion on Wall Street. That's not what it's about. I don't trust any companies that go public. In that sense, the cannabis industry being so new, it would be awesome, unrealistic, but awesome if the cannabis industry was the first industry that started out with sustainability as a guiding factor instead of this capitalistic overthrow type exploitation that happens to every commodity. It's like once we're globalized, like, oh my God, man, poor cannabis farmers. Cannabis growers are already taking their own lives from the stress that these regulations are putting on them. Can you imagine when this turns into corn or soy, which I really do see big ag coming in and buying this stuff up anyways. So just unfortunate.
Yeah, it really is. What's the things that kind of are on the top of your mind these days about, where there's just so much BS and where it's not being called out on?
The BS in California is being called out. It's just not being heard by the right people. And the people that are speaking out are the people that don't have the money. And the people that have the money are not listening because they're too busy dominating the industry. And what comes to my mind, first of all, is license stacking, which was not supposed to happen. There was supposed to be protections for small and medium growers in California by limiting the maximum amount of a grow that you could have to 22,000 feet for 5 years. And then literally the night before they published the regulations, they removed the restriction of companies having multiple licenses in properties next to each other, therefore adding up to a massive grow. So, there's no protection in the state as far as out-of-state investors. They can come in. So this is the 5th largest economy in the world. That's not good. That's, of course, a ton of money from out of state is going to pour into California. But the problem is that money is not helping or improving anything. It's making the industry so much worse. It's kind of like when rich people have a drug addiction. It sucks that they have so much money that they're able to just fuel their drug addiction and get even worse. Well, it's kind of like that in California. These businesses were never run by business people. They were run by cannabis people who avoided paying taxes and other things like that. HR was a bad word. And now we're going to have all these investors come in and invest in poorly run businesses, or come in and think they know better than everyone else and then try and do things their own way when they're still having to deal with people from the old market, which is not even a year old, the legal market. So I just see so much outside money and influence coming in and really fucking up California. And the other thing is lobbyists on a local level. If you don't have a lobbyist and you're just trying to do things correctly, you're going to be waiting around for a while, and it's going to cost you a ton of money either way. You're going to have to work twice as hard because you have to be friends with the local politicians so that you know what's going on, because you have to attend every meeting because things change all the time. You have to really want it. And it's just not sustainable for some people that hear, oh, so the city says there's this green area. I have a building in that green area, so I'm going to apply for a license, and I'll just keep paying the rent on here so when I get the license, I can open up. Except the licensing aspect never happens. Like in LA, it's 2018. They started to attempt, I say that in quotes, license companies. Since 2007, they have failed to do it. And there's just even more difficulty to do it now. And there are all these people just sitting there spending money, waiting and waiting for an indefinite amount of time. That's not sustainable either. So none of this is really sustainable. And when these grows come online, there's going to be so much more cannabis than there are outlets to buy it or people to buy it. And as long as the taxation is so high, people are just going to go to the black market. There are so many problems, it could fill up like 2 episodes or 3 or 4.
At the beginning of that, you said that there's a lot of people talking about this stuff, but the right people aren't hearing it or listening to it. Can you say a little bit more about that? Who the right people are and what they're not hearing or listening to?
The only way, in my opinion, the only way we are going to be able to change the industry is if everyone becomes more informed about what's going on and asks questions and holds people accountable. Question your local government, like request documents. Don't be passive and just wait around or whatever, because you will not be taken care of. You will lose everything. Like they will literally take everything from you. There is no guilt in politics, just money. That's it.
What are you just most passionate about with respect to cannabis and this podcast?
My passion lies in saying what everyone else is thinking, feeling, or experiencing, but is not saying for whatever reason. Maybe it goes against their profit or whatever, their relationships. But I am beholden to nobody. And I've always, since I got into this industry, I've always been the person trying to educate everyone and make people realize what's really going on. And while people want to choose to be optimistic, that is not the way you should be entering this industry. Like, I am here to take care of delusions. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm not kidding. People have so many delusions coming into this industry. So my passion is busting those delusions and bringing people down to earth and getting them prepared for a battle. Because if this is a battle that you don't want to be in, you should be really glad that I stopped you. And if you want to continue the battle after I've told you these things, then you're ready. But you should know that this is not fun anymore. This is a completely different game, and you've got to want it. I mean, more than wanting the money, you want to succeed, and you want to be a part of the culture. So this podcast is a culmination of my passion to be a well-known watcher of the industry. I want people, companies, bad people, shady people to know that, like, you are not unknown. What you're doing is kind of obvious. And that's what my podcast is about, is calling out bad business practices. So watch out.
Final thoughts for your listeners here. You want to leave them with one thing. What thought or what piece of opinion or what statement would be the thing that you'd want people to take away from knowing about this?
Question everything and everyone and do your research. Take nothing at face value. Nothing is ever that simple in the cannabis industry. You can go into it with good intentions and you can stay positive, but trust no one or anything you hear until you validate it. If you're going to work with professionals like accountants or lawyers or any of those types of people, you definitely need to do your due diligence, because that's where I'm seeing the most corruption is coming from professional ancillary service providers. So if I can give any words of advice, it is to question everything and everyone, always.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the CannaBS Detector Podcast. We're working hard to create new episodes for you every week that are informative, relevant, and highlight the lowlights in the California cannabis industry. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your favorite podcatcher, and follow us on LinkedIn for additional updates and insights as we bring you the news you might not want to hear, but need to. The CannaBS Detector is produced by Soil to the Oil Media.